Who are you without the food struggle? You might not have an answer to that question, and that is exactly why it matters. Today, we're asking something most of us have never had to face because the struggle has been present for so long that we've never had to find out who we are without it. But that's exactly where we're going today. Welcome to Binge Eating Breakthrough, the podcast to help you stop feeling out of control around food and build trust with your body. If you've tried everything but still feel stuck, you're not alone. I've been there too. I'm Jane Pilger, and I'm here to help you see binge eating in a new way so you can finally break free. Each week, you'll get the tools and insights to create peace with food and your body. Your breakthrough starts now. Hello, trusted listener. I consider you a trusted listener because I trust that some part of you already knows that this question, who are you without the food struggle, matters, even if you have never let yourself ask it out loud. And I trust that even if you don't have the answer yet, you're willing to get curious. So I want to tell you a little bit about this episode. I had already been planning this episode. I had the title figured out. I kind of knew a little bit of my own story that I wanted to share with you. And I got an email this week that asked the very question I was preparing to explore. And that email really confirmed for me that this topic matters, no matter where you are on your journey with food. So the email that I got this week came from somebody who was asking some questions about an upcoming episode that I'm putting together on GLP-1s and binge eating, which I will be covering next week. So stay tuned for that one. But what she shared confirmed for me that this is a question that so many people are carrying, whether they are aware of it or not. And I think it's a question that's really important for every one of us to be able to answer. And this question, who are you without the food struggle? It kind of sounds like maybe it sounds like a simple question, but there is a reason that this question feels challenging to answer if you've ever even asked it of yourself. So this person who emailed me, she's currently on a GLP-1 and she has reached what she calls her happy weight. She is living in maintenance. And she told me that she has struggled with weight, food, and body image for as long as she can remember, since her very first time at Weight Watchers at age 8. Side note, there are so many women who were taken to Weight Watchers at the age of 8, 9, 10. So if that is you and you are listening, please know that you are not alone. But here's what she said. Her entire life, in some way or another, has involved food, dieting, and a focus on her weight. It was intertwined in everything. It consumed her, and it still tends to. And now that she's at the number she always wanted, and she's feeling good in her body, she's asking herself, what now? What does she have to focus on, to dwell on, if not this? How does she live her life without weight, diet, and food constantly at the center of it? So that question is exactly what we're exploring today. Who are you without the food struggle? And whether you are like this other listener who is kind of on the other side of the food struggle and still asking this question, who am I without it? Or whether you find yourself very much still in the struggle, this question is really important to examine. And I want to share a story of the first time that I considered this question for myself. So this is many years ago, and I was working with my eating disorders therapist, and she introduced me to Byron Katie and her work that is called The Work. So if anybody is not familiar with Byron Katie and the work, it's really amazing. Byron Katie is an amazing individual. You can certainly go out and find all kinds of great information about her. But the work, it's a method of self-inquiry. So what you do is you take a thought, something you believe about yourself or your life, something that is causing you pain, causing you challenge, and you run this thought through 4 questions. So the 4 questions are, is it true? Number 1. Number 2, can you absolutely know it's true? Number 3, how do you react? Or what happens when you believe that thought? And then the question number 4 is, who would you be without that thought? And after the 4 questions, you do what's called a turnaround. And you take the original statement and you flip it to see if the opposite of what you are believing might be just as true or truer. So my therapist had introduced me to this concept. We kind of were working through the 4 questions together, and we were working on one of the thoughts that was on repeat in my mind at the time. Now, I don't remember exactly what the thought had been, but I'm going to guess it was one of these 3, because these are the 3 thoughts that were just constantly at the forefront of my mind. Number 1, I need to lose weight. Number 2, I'm out of control with food. Number 3, I don't trust myself around food. Those were the 3 thoughts that were just constantly always there. So I can't even remember which one of those 3 that we were doing the 4 questions around. And we went through the first 3 questions. Is this true? Can you absolutely know it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? Those were all okay. I was kind of struggling a little bit, but we get to the last question. Who would you be without that thought? And I could not answer the question. My brain just drew a blank. I had no idea. And I remember crying, feeling like I had failed the assignment. I did not have an answer. I didn't even have the beginning of an answer. And the thought, whichever one we were working on, it had been such a permanent fixture in how I understood myself, that I need to lose weight, that I'm out of control around food, that I can't trust myself around food. I genuinely could not picture who I was without this thought. And what I didn't understand at the time was how much the food struggle had taken over my identity. And since that time, I have learned just how common this is. So many of us have only known ourselves through this struggle for most of our lives, if not all of it. And so the listener who emailed me earlier this week, it's proof of exactly that. She got to the goal and she still doesn't know who she is on the other side of it. So today we're going to talk about why this happens and then what we can actually do about it. Because here's what I want you to know. If you do not know who you are or who you are becoming without the food struggle, you're not likely to be able to let it go. Your brain needs somewhere to go. And if it doesn't have a clear picture of where it's headed, it will keep returning to what it already knows, even when what it knows is painful. Because what it knows is familiar. And the brain will choose familiarity every time, unless we give it something else to choose. So this is the 3rd and final episode in a little mini series on parts. So we've talked about the part that hides in 2 episodes ago. In the last week's episode, we talked about the part that checks out. And today we're really asking a different kind of question. So we're not really talking about a specific part, but what we're really going to explore is about who is underneath all of these parts. So let's talk about what happens when this food struggle, it's like when something occupies your thoughts for years or even decades, it doesn't stay a behavior. It becomes a lens. So you stop having a food struggle and you start being someone who struggles with food. And this line between the two, it disappears so gradually that you don't notice it happening. So think about just how much mental real estate this food struggle takes up. What you'll eat today, what you shouldn't have eaten yesterday, how your clothes fit, when you get to eat again, what the scale said this morning, what you'll say if someone offers you something at the office, whether you skip the party this weekend altogether, not because you don't want to see anyone, but because you don't trust yourself around the food that will be there. Or maybe you don't want to face what people might think about how your body has changed. This is not just a passing thought that happens every once in a while. For a lot of people, it is the operating system running quietly or sometimes very loudly under everything else all day, every day. And when something runs that constantly for that long, it starts to answer a question you didn't even know that you were asking. And that question is this: who am I? So for so many of us, the answer became, I'm someone who is fighting this. I am someone who is failing at this. I am someone who is broken. I am someone who is out of control. I am someone who can't trust myself. I am someone who can't eat like everyone else seems to be able to. I am someone who will finally be free once this is solved. So the food struggle stopped being something that happened to us, and it became the story we told ourselves about who we are. And that listener's email captures this perfectly. She didn't just lose weight. She hit the number she'd been chasing since she was 8 years old. The number that was supposed to be the answer. And what she found on the other side wasn't relief. It was a void where the identity used to be. Weight, diet, and food weren't just a problem to solve. They were the center of gravity for her entire sense of self. So if you take that away, even by succeeding, and there is a real question underneath, who am I now? So let's take a look at when you can't answer the question, who would I be without this? Whether you are in a place where the food struggle kind of seems to be more towards your rearview mirror, or you feel very much in the middle of it. This is kind of where I landed too in that therapy session. It's like I could not answer the question, who would I be without this? And at the time, I really thought that it meant that because I couldn't answer that question, it meant I was failing at the exercise. But that's not what it meant at all. What it actually meant was that the thoughts, whichever of those three thoughts that I was focusing on at the time, and the struggle underneath it, my struggle with food, had become load-bearing. It wasn't just a belief that I held. It was structural. So if I tried to remove it, I didn't know what was left. And this happens to so many people I work with, whether it's in my Cultivate group program or one-on-one. I will ask some version of the question, who do you want to be as an eater? Or who are you without this struggle? And initially I get silence. And it's not because they're not trying, but it's because there is genuinely nothing there yet. The struggle has been the only identity available for so long, the question doesn't compute. Because where the brain goes is, it's not about the identity or who you want to be. It's about stopping this thing. I want to stop binge eating. I want to lose weight. It's more of the focus on what I want to do versus who I want to be. And this isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign of exactly how much space this has occupied. It makes sense. If the food struggle has been running since childhood, since age 8, since a first diet, since before you can even remember not thinking about it, of course there isn't a fully formed answer waiting underneath. You haven't had the space to build one. You may not have literally ever even asked the question. Nobody hands you the identity of who you want to be. You have to construct it on purpose. And usually for the first time in your adult life. I spend so much time helping people transition from that shift to, I just want to lose weight. I just want to stop binge eating, towards, I want to become this type of eater, towards really focusing on who you want to be. Now, here's what I want to offer you in terms of what is underneath all of this. So this is something that I work on with all of my clients. We've talked in the last couple of episodes about the parts. Well, underneath the parts, underneath the struggle, underneath even the identity that formed around fighting all of this, there is something that isn't defined by any of that. So I like to call it the anchored self. It is the wise, grounded center of who you are, the truth of who you are, the self that exists all the time. Even when you have a part that's hiding, that's sneaking food, when you have a part that is completely checked out, zoning out, even when the struggle has been running the show for years. So the anchored self, this is not something you have to create or build from scratch. It is already there. It's more like the sun behind the clouds. You can't always feel it or see it, especially on the days when the clouds are thick, but it doesn't stop existing just because it's obscured. The work isn't creating it. The work is clearing enough space to notice that it is already there. And this is so important for the question, who would you be without this struggle? Because the answer isn't nothing. It's not an empty space where the struggle used to live. It's you. The version of you that was always underneath the struggle, that got quieter and quieter the louder the food noise got. But that version is still there, waiting for enough room to be heard. So if the food struggle has been the identity and the anchored self is what's underneath it, you might be wondering what actually helps somebody move from one to the other. How do I get out of this identity as somebody who struggles with food? This is one of the very first things that I work through with any client. Whether this is in my Cultivate group program and a one-on-one session, one of the very first things we do is we get very specific about who they want to become as an eater. Not just someone who doesn't binge. A real, very clear picture. What do they think about at a meal? What do they notice in their body? How do they talk to themselves after a hard day? What does food mean to them when it's no longer the center of everything? So I did a full episode on this a while back, and it's titled Your Identity as an Eater. And I'm going to go ahead and link it in the show notes if you want to go deeper on the practice itself. But really, you kind of coming up with your identity as an eater is everything. And it's exactly where we start this work. So definitely go and check that out. And here's why this matters. Your brain is built to move toward the clearest picture that it has. If the clearest, most detailed, most rehearsed picture it has is the struggle, the fighting, the failing, that is what it will keep producing, even when it's painful, even when you consciously want something different. It's not being difficult. It is doing exactly what it is built to do. So the work isn't only letting go of the old identity. It's building a new one that is clear enough and real enough that your brain has somewhere else to go. So that listener who emailed me, sitting in her maintenance right now, asking what now, she's not stuck because something went wrong. She's standing exactly where you stand right after you clear out something that took up your whole life. There's space now. And space, before anything fills it, can feel like emptiness. But it isn't. It's an opening. So then you get to decide, what do I want to put in this space? What do I want to fill this space with? All right, so let's dive into some practical shifts, some ways that you can start exploring this for yourself this week. So we can start with trying Byron Katie's 4th question for yourself. So take a thought that you have on repeat about yourself, about food, about your weight, about control, about trust, and just ask yourself the question, who would I be without this thought? You don't have to force an answer. Just notice what happens when you sit with it. And if something happens for you, like for me, where I just kind of went completely blank, I had no idea, you might start with her first 2 questions. Is this thought true? How do I really know that it's true? Sometimes just questioning the thought is enough of a start before we go into the 4th question. Now, next thing you can do is just notice where the food struggle has kind of shifted into your identity. So you might ask yourself, where I'm someone who struggles with food might be standing in for a bigger sense of who you are. Do you define yourself by your food struggles? I can't trust myself. I can't be trusted. That you are creating an identity there. So just notice. We can't change what we're not aware of. Next, you can start sketching your future identity as an eater. Get really specific with the image. What do you notice? What does a meal feel like for you? What do you trust? And again, the more detailed that picture, the more your brain has to move toward. If you are a person who doesn't really do can't come up with visual images in your brain, some people can't, go towards the feelings, how you want to feel, calm, peaceful, connected, trusting. Next, you can look for the anchored self in a small moment. Just get curious about, can I find my anchored self in any place today? Notice one moment, even just this week, food related or not, where you respond with more of this feeling of kind of like groundedness, of confidence, of calm, instead of pressure or urgency or anxiety or trying to control. That's not you becoming someone new. That is the self that was and is always there. And lastly, I want you to let this question be an opening. I want you to allow yourself to sit with this question. Don't let this question, who am I without this? Don't let it become a problem to solve immediately. I was listening to an audiobook recently. It was talking about how so many people, especially people who are kind of achievers, who really like to, kind of solve problems and really use that kind of left side of their brain, have answers and get solutions, I really struggle with the idea of just letting their brain just kind of sit with questions that don't necessarily have a very easy answer. And how it's hard for our brains to do this, but it's so important, especially for these bigger kind of identity questions that don't have a right or a wrong answer. So let yourself just explore this question without needing to have a very simple, clear answer. Let this be something I like to think about two analogies. Either it can be something that you just kind of like marinate on, just like you would marinate some meat to get nice and juicy and tender. Allow yourself to just marinate on this question. Or the other analogy we can use is we can plant the seed. We can plant the seed of this question. We can water it with some ideas and with some thoughts and curiosity, some kind of just bringing in this openness, this willingness to just explore and think about who I want to be without needing to see the sprouts right away. So just let this be an opening. Don't force yourself to have a perfect answer right away. So if you have ever tried to imagine who you would be without the food struggle and you've come up empty, I want you to hear this. That is not a failure. It's a sign of how much space this has taken up and how little room there has been to build anything else. But I can tell you on this side of it, I would love to go back and have a conversation with that version of me who was crying on the couch because I had no idea who I would be without it. And now I know I am not the struggle. You are not the struggle. I never was, and you never were. Underneath it is a version of you that has been there the whole time, waiting for enough space to be heard. And the work now is building a picture that is clear enough that you can actually walk toward it. So if you're ready to start doing that work, I want to point you to something I haven't talked about in a little while, but it is a mini series of small short videos called Stop Binge Eating Miniseries. It will walk you through some foundational shifts that make this kind of change possible. It will help you understand why you have this struggle in the first place. Short videos you can watch all on your own time, and you can find that at janepilger.com/mini. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. Now, next week, we're going to talk about GLP-1s and binge eating. Now, I'm not going to be getting into the specifics around what the medication does because GLP-1s are not my lane or my area of expertise, but I will be answering some of the questions I've been getting and sharing what I have noticed with clients that I have who are taking a GLP-1 while also doing the inner work. So be sure to tune into that if that's a topic of interest for you next week. All right, that's what I have for you today. I'll see you next week. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you will love my new book, The Binge Eating Breakthrough: Why Food Isn't the Problem and What Really Is. Discover why willpower isn't the answer, why restricting certain foods often backfires, and why understanding your brain and body is the key to lasting change. Learn to shift from shame and self-blame to curiosity and compassion. Get it today at janepilger.com/book.